The day Carol Bennett cornered me by the break room fridge and told me her niece had a crush on me, I had a burrito in one hand, mustard on my sleeve, and absolutely no idea I was about to spend the next 4 months chasing the wrong woman. My name is Ryan Cole. I'm 31, I work logistics for a regional shipping company outside Denver, and up until that Tuesday, my biggest concern in life was whether the new scheduling software was going to make me lose my mind before Friday. I wasn't looking for anything. Not a relationship, not a project, not a complication. I liked my apartment, I liked my quiet evenings, and I liked showing up to work, doing my job, and going home without anybody needing anything from me that a paycheck couldn't cover. That changed when Carol showed up at my job. She wasn't supposed to be there. She wasn't an employee. She was somebody's mother, and it took me a second to place whose. Then I saw her walking beside Nora Bennett from receiving, and the resemblance clicked into place. Same sharp eyes. Same way of standing like she'd already decided what she thought of you before you opened your mouth. Nora and I worked the same floor. We weren't close, exactly, but we weren't strangers either. She ran the receiving dock like a woman who didn't have time for nonsense, kept her headphones in during lunch, and had a laugh that came out rare enough that when you heard it, you remembered it. She had a daughter, I knew that much. A little girl named Ivy, maybe 6 or 7, who I'd seen once or twice when daycare fell through and Nora had to bring her in for an hour before her sister could pick her up. That day, Carol marched straight up to me at the fridge like she'd been planning the conversation in her car. "You're Ryan," she said. Not a question. That's me. Carol. Nora's mother. She looked me over the way you'd look over a used truck. "You've got good shoulders. Do you work out or is that just genetics?" I nearly choked on my burrito. Mostly just lifting boxes, ma'am. Don't call me ma'am, it makes me feel like a substitute teacher. She glanced over her shoulder, then back at me, lowering her voice like we were suddenly conspirators. "I have a niece. Paige. She's smart, she's pretty, and she is entirely too picky for her own good, which is a family trait I take full responsibility for. She saw a photo of you at the company picnic last month and she has not shut up about it since." I stood there with mustard on my sleeve, trying to figure out how a woman I'd met 4 seconds ago already had opinions about my love life. "That's flattering," I said, because I didn't know what else to say. "It should be. Paige doesn't get crushes. She gets standards." Carol patted my arm like she'd just closed a business deal. Sunday. Family dinner. 6 o'clock. Bring an appetite and wear something that isn't a company polo. Then she was gone, back down the hallway toward the dock, leaving me standing there holding a burrito and absolutely no framework for what had just happened. I looked over and caught Nora watching from the doorway of the break room. She had her arms crossed, one eyebrow up, an expression on her face I couldn't quite read. "Your mom just invited me to dinner," I said. "I heard." Nora's voice was flat, almost careful. "You don't have to go." "Does she do this a lot?" "More than you'd think." She turned back toward the dock before I could ask anything else, and something about the way she said it stuck with me longer than it should have. I told myself I wasn't going to go. I had zero interest in being set up by somebody's mother in a break room, and even less interest in meeting a woman I'd never spoken to based on a photo from a company picnic. But Sunday came, and I found myself standing in front of my closet at 5:15, arguing with myself about whether a button-down was overdressed for what was probably going to be an awkward hour of small talk and casserole. I went. Curiosity is a hell of a drug. The Bennett house sat on a quiet street with a wraparound porch and a swing that needed oil. Carol answered the door wearing an apron that said "Kiss the cook." She's tired, and pulled me in by the wrist like she'd been waiting at the window. "You came," she said. "Good instincts." The house smelled like garlic and roasted chicken. Somewhere in the back, I could hear a television playing something with too much laughter in it, the kind of canned sound that only comes from a kid's show. Nora was in the kitchen, sleeves pushed up, stirring something on the stove, and she looked up when I walked in with an expression that was somewhere between surprise and resignation. "You actually showed up," she said. "Your mom's very convincing." "My mom's a force of nature." "There's a difference." Before I could answer, a small voice came barreling around the corner, and I got my first real look at Ivy. She had Nora's same sharp eyes, dark hair in 2 uneven braids, and a gap where she was missing a front tooth. She stopped dead when she saw me, sizing me up the exact same way her grandmother had at the fridge. "Are you the boxman?" she asked. I blinked. "The what?" "Mom said you carry boxes all day. Are you the boxman?" Nora's face went red so fast I almost laughed. "Ivy." "What?" "You did say that. Go wash your hands, dinner's almost ready." Ivy ran off, but not before shooting me one more look over her shoulder, the kind of look that felt like she was still deciding something about me. Paige never showed. I found that out about 20 minutes in, when Carol set the table for 5 and then, halfway through serving the chicken, mentioned offhandedly that Paige had gotten stuck at work and would try to make it next time. Nora didn't look surprised. She didn't look anything, actually, just kept passing the mashed potatoes like the conversation wasn't happening. "Next time," Carol repeated, like it was a promise instead of an excuse. "She's a hard worker. Vet tech. You'd like her." I nodded politely and ate my chicken and didn't say what I was thinking, which was that hard worker seemed to be doing a lot of load-bearing in a sentence that was supposed to be about a woman who supposedly couldn't stop talking about me. Dinner went fine, actually. Better than fine. Ivy narrated most of it, telling me about a kid at school who ate a crayon, and a book about a dragon who was afraid of fire, and 100 small details that I had no reason to care about but somehow found myself listening to anyway. Nora kept trying to redirect her, embarrassed, but I told her it was fine. I meant it. "You're good with her," Carol said later, when Nora had taken Ivy up for a bath and it was just the 2 of us clearing plates. "She's easy to talk to. She likes you." Carol said it simply, like a fact and not an opinion. "She doesn't warm up to people that fast. Trust me, I've watched her try. She's 7. I don't think that's a high bar." Carol looked at me for a long second, like she was weighing whether to say something else. Then she just smiled and changed the subject, and I didn't think much of it at the time. I should have. That became the pattern for the next few weeks. Carol would text me. She got my number from Nora without asking either of us, which should have been my first real warning sign, and mentioned that Paige was so sorry she'd missed another dinner. Work trip. Double shift. A dog with a broken leg that needed overnight monitoring. There was always a reason, and every reason was reasonable enough on its own, but stacked together they started to look less like bad luck and more like something else. I kept going to the dinners anyway. Not for Paige. I barely thought about Paige at all after the second no-show. I kept going because Sunday dinner at the Bennett house had turned into the best part of my week, and I wasn't ready to examine too closely why that was. Nora started talking to me more at work, too. Not big conversations. Small ones. She'd ask if I wanted coffee when she made a run. She'd save me a seat at lunch without making it a thing. Once, when a shipment got mislabeled and I took the blame for it in front of our supervisor even though it wasn't my fault, she cornered me afterward in the hallway. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Do what?" "Take the hit for Danny's mistake. Everybody knew it wasn't you." I shrugged. "He's got a kid at home and one more write-up before probation." "I don't." Nora looked at me for a long moment, like she was recalculating something in her head. "That's a very Ivy thing to say." "She does that. Takes the blame for other kids so they don't get in trouble. Guess I've got good taste in who I remind you of." That got a real laugh out of her, the rare kind, and something in my chest did a small, stupid flip that I chose to ignore. It was around week 6 that I started noticing Ivy's smile. I don't mean that in some poetic, oblivious way. I mean I actually started paying attention to it, the way you notice a pattern once your brain finally clocks that it's a pattern. Every time I walked into that kitchen, Ivy would look up from whatever she was doing, homework, a coloring book, a bowl of cereal, and there'd be this smile. Not a shy smile. A knowing one. Like she was in on something the rest of us hadn't figured out yet. The first time, I thought nothing of it. Kids smile. That's what they do. But by the 4th or 5th Sunday, I caught her doing it and glancing sideways at her mom right after, like she was checking Nora's reaction to my arrival before deciding how to react herself. One night, while Nora was upstairs getting Ivy's bath ready and I was helping Carol dry dishes, I finally asked, "Does Ivy usually smile at everybody like that?" Carol paused mid-dry, dish towel hanging loose in her hand. "Like what?" "I don't know. Like she's got a secret." Carol's mouth did something complicated, somewhere between a smile and a wince, and then she went back to drying the plate like the question hadn't landed anywhere important. "Kids smile at people they like, Ryan. Don't overthink it." But I did overthink it. That's the thing about a small detail. Once you start noticing it, you can't stop noticing it. Every dinner after that, I watched Ivy smile when I walked in. The way she'd position herself next to me at the table without asking. The way she'd tug my sleeve to show me a drawing before showing her own mother. And every time, that same quick glance toward Nora afterward, checking, measuring, like a kid running an experiment she didn't fully understand yet. Meanwhile, Paige remained a ghost. 4 dinners in a row, no Paige. Carol kept promising next time with a straight face that started to feel less like coincidence and more like performance. I finally asked her directly, halfway through week 8, while we sat on the porch swing waiting for the chicken to finish. "Does Paige actually exist?" Carol laughed. Too quick, too bright. Of course she exists. She's just busy. Every single Sunday. Vet techs work strange hours. Carol. She looked at me sideways, swing creaking under us, and for a second I thought she was actually going to tell me something real. Then Ivy burst through the screen door yelling that the timer went off, and the moment closed like a door swinging shut, and I let it go because I didn't know yet how much it mattered. It mattered because of what happened 2 weeks later. I'd started, without really planning it, picking Ivy up from her after-school program on the days Nora's shift ran long. It wasn't a big deal. I lived close, I had the time, and Nora looked so relieved the first time I offered that I couldn't have talked myself out of doing it again even if I'd wanted to. Ivy would climb into my truck, buckle herself in with the seriousness of someone twice her age, and narrate the entire drive home like she was giving a news report. One afternoon, out of nowhere, she asked, "Are you gonna marry my mom?" I nearly ran the stop sign. What? No. I mean, we're not, your mom and I aren't like that. Ivy looked unimpressed, the exact same expression her grandmother wore when she thought I was being slow. Grandma says you are. She says it's just taking a while because you're being polite. My hands went tight on the wheel. Your grandma said what, now? That you like Mom, but you think you're supposed to like Aunt Paige, so you keep coming to dinner for the wrong reason, and eventually you'll figure out the right one. Ivy said all of this like she was reciting a grocery list, completely unbothered by the size of what had just come out of her mouth. She said not to tell you, but I don't really keep secrets good. I didn't say anything for almost a full block. My brain was doing the kind of scramble it does when a puzzle you didn't know you were solving suddenly rearranges itself in front of you. Ivy, I said carefully. Does your mom know Grandma says that? No. Mom would be mad. Ivy looked out the window, suddenly a little less sure of herself. Did I mess it up? No, kid. You didn't mess anything up. But I sat with that the rest of the drive, and long after I dropped her off, and long into that night, turning it over and over. Because if Ivy was right, if Carol had spent 2 months dangling a niece who conveniently never showed up, also I'd keep coming back to that house every Sunday and slowly, quietly fall for the woman actually standing in the kitchen, then everything I thought I understood about the past 2 months was wrong. Or not wrong. Just incomplete. Like watching half a movie and thinking you'd seen the whole thing. I didn't say anything to Nora right away. I wanted to be sure. I wanted to watch a little longer, the way you check a bridge before you put your full weight on it. The next Sunday, I watched Carol differently. I watched the way she talked about Paige with just slightly too much detail, the kind of detail people add when they're building a story instead of remembering one. I watched the way she'd find reasons to leave me and Nora alone in the kitchen, an errand, a phone call, a sudden need to check on the laundry, reasons that always evaporated the second Nora and I actually started talking. I watched Ivy smile again, and this time I understood it differently. She wasn't smiling because she had a crush on the boxman. She was smiling because, in her small, unfiltered way, she already knew what the adults around her were too careful to say out loud. She'd been reading her mother's face for months, and she knew exactly what she saw there every time I walked through that door. I finally cornered Carol in the kitchen the following week, once Nora had taken Ivy out to the yard to catch fireflies. I need you to tell me the truth, I said. Is there a Paige? Carol went still, dish towel forgotten in her hand. For a second, I thought she was going to keep the act going. Then her shoulders dropped, just slightly, and something more honest came through. There's a Paige, she admitted. She's my niece. She's also engaged. Has been for 2 years. I have never once suggested she had a crush on you. So you lied. I improvised. Carol set the towel down and turned to face me fully, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked less like a force of nature and more like a mother who'd been carrying something heavy for a long time. Ryan, my daughter has not looked at a man the way she looks at you since before Ivy was born. Her marriage nearly broke her. Her ex made her feel small for 4 straight years, made her feel like being careful, being steady, being reliable, was some kind of character flaw. When it ended, she swore off men entirely. Not dramatically. Quietly. The kind of quiet that scares a mother more than any crying ever could. I didn't say anything. I just listened. Then you started at the dock, Carol continued. And she came home one night and mentioned you, completely by accident, in the middle of talking about something else. Nothing big. Just, Ryan carried the heavy pallets so I didn't have to ask twice. That was it. That was the whole sentence. But I heard something in her voice I hadn't heard in years, and I decided I was not going to sit around and wait for her to talk herself out of it, because she would have. She's very good at talking herself out of things. So you invented a niece. I invented an excuse to get you in my kitchen without either of you having to admit anything. Carol's voice wavered, just slightly. I know it was manipulative. I know I should have just introduced you properly and let it happen naturally, or not happen at all. But naturally wasn't working. You two worked 20 feet apart for a year and never said more than good morning. Sometimes people need a push, even a dishonest one, especially when the alternative is watching someone you love stay lonely because she's scared of being disappointed again. I looked toward the window, where I could see Nora crouched in the yard, holding a mason jar up to Ivy's face, both of them laughing at something I couldn't hear. She's going to be furious with you, I said. Probably. Carol didn't look worried about that at all. But she's not furious at you. She likes you, Ryan. Genuinely. That part was never invented. That part one just gave a little room to breathe. I stood there in that kitchen with 2 months of Sunday dinners rearranging themselves in my memory, and for the first time, I understood the smile. Ivy's smile every time I walked in wasn't about a crush she'd invented for a stranger. It was the smile of a kid who'd been watching her mother come back to life one dinner at a time, and who knew, in that simple way kids know things before adults let themselves know them, exactly what that meant. I didn't tell Nora that night. I wasn't ready, and honestly, I didn't think it was my story to hand her without thinking it through first. But something shifted in me on the drive home, some quiet certainty that hadn't been there before. I wasn't showing up on Sundays for chicken and small talk anymore. I hadn't been for a while, if I was honest with myself. I was showing up because somewhere between Ivy's dragon stories and Nora's rare laugh and the particular way she said my name when she was trying not to sound too glad I was there, I had stopped waiting for a niece who was never coming and started paying attention to the woman who'd been standing in front of me the entire time. The truth came out 3 weeks later, and not the way any of us planned. We were at the dock, mid-shift, when Danny, the same guy Nora had mentioned before, the one with the write-up hanging over him, made an offhand comment in the break room that landed wrong. He was talking to another guy, not thinking Nora was in earshot, joking about how I'd been adopted into the Bennett family and how it was cute that I was still pretending it's about the niece. Nora went still in the doorway. I watched her face change in real time, watched 2 months of careful, guarded hope curdle into something sharper. She didn't say anything in the break room. She waited until we were both back on the floor, until it was just the two of us near the loading bay, boxes stacked between us like a wall neither of us was going to climb over easily. "Is there actually a Paige?" she said. Not a question. A demand. I could have lied. I could have softened it, found some careful middle ground that protected her mother and protected myself and kept the whole thing comfortable for a little longer. I didn't. "There's a Paige," I said. "She's engaged. She's never had a crush on me. Your mom made the whole thing up." Nora's jaw tightened. "How long have you known?" 3 weeks. 3 weeks. She let out a short, humorless laugh and looked away, out toward the parking lot, arms crossed so tight it looked like she was holding herself together. God. Of course she did. Of course my mother orchestrated an entire fake relative just to. She stopped herself, pressed her lips together, and I watched her decide, right there in front of me, whether to be furious or humiliated, like she couldn't figure out which one hurt less. "Nora. Don't." Her voice cracked on the word, just slightly. "I have spent 2 months feeling like an idiot for wondering why my mother kept inviting you over. I told myself it was just her being friendly. I told myself I wasn't imagining the way you and Ivy." She cut herself off again, shaking her head. "It doesn't matter. It matters to me." She looked up at me then, and there it was, the exact expression I'd been trying to name for weeks without letting myself finish the thought. Not anger, not really. Fear wearing anger's clothes. The particular fear of a woman who had built a very careful wall after her marriage ended, brick by brick, and who had just watched someone find a door in it without either of them fully choosing to. "I don't want to be somebody's project," she said quietly. "I don't want to be the thing you got talked into caring about because my mother staged the whole thing like a play. You're not a project." I stepped closer, close enough that the space between us stopped feeling like distance and started feeling like something else. "Nora, I didn't keep showing up because your mother told me to. I kept showing up because your daughter tells the worst dragon jokes I've ever heard, and because you saved me a seat at lunch without making it weird, and because the one night you actually laughed for real, I went home and thought about it for 2 hours like an idiot. Your mother didn't invent that. She just gave it somewhere to happen." Nora didn't say anything for a long moment. The forklift beeped somewhere behind us, backing up, and neither of us moved. "Ivy told me you might marry me," she finally said, and there was the smallest thread of a smile in it now, fighting its way through everything else. "Before any of this came out. She told me at bath time like it was the most obvious thing in the world. She told me the same thing in the truck. Nearly ran a stop sign." That got a real laugh out of her, watery and surprised, and something in my chest loosened for the first time since Carol's confession. "She's been watching this whole time," Nora said. "Reading the room better than either of us. Kids do that. They don't have the good sense to pretend they don't notice things. Nora wiped under her eye with the back of her wrist, half laughing, half not. My mother owes me an apology the size of Colorado. She knows. She's not proud of the method. She just wasn't sorry about the result. Nora looked at me for a long moment, something settling behind her eyes, some decision finally landing after weeks of circling. And you're not just here because you got talked into it. Say it again so I actually believe it. I'm not here because of a niece who doesn't exist, I said. I'm here because of you. I have been for a while. I just needed your mother's terrible plan to catch up to what I already knew. She didn't say anything back right away. She just closed the distance between us, careful, deliberate, like she was testing whether the ground would hold, and when I didn't step back, she kissed me right there by the loading bay, forklift beeping somewhere behind us, boxes stacked like a wall we'd finally climbed over together. Carol got her apology/thank you speech about a week later, delivered by Nora at the kitchen table with Ivy sitting between us, gap-toothed and grinning like she'd known the ending of the story the whole time. You lied to both of us, Nora said, arms crossed, trying very hard to sound stern and mostly failing. I redirected the narrative, Carol said, unbothered, sliding a casserole dish across the table like that settled it. You invented a fake crush for a real person. I gave two stubborn people a reason to sit in the same kitchen until they figured out what was obvious to everyone else in the room. Carol looked at Ivy. Wasn't it obvious, baby? So obvious, Ivy said solemnly, shoveling mashed potatoes onto her plate. I smiled at him every single time and nobody figured out why for 2 whole months. The table went quiet for a second, and then all 4 of us started laughing at once, the real kind, the kind that comes out before you decide to let it, and I remember thinking, right there at that table with garlic and roasted chicken in the air and Ivy narrating her school day between bites, that I hadn't walked into anything I regretted. I'd walked into exactly the family I didn't know I'd been missing, dressed up as a setup with a niece who was never coming. We got married 18 months later, in Carol's backyard, under string lights. She insisted on hanging herself even though I told her 3 times I'd get a ladder. Ivy was the flower girl, and halfway down the aisle she stopped, looked directly at the guests, and announced, I knew this was gonna happen, which got a bigger laugh than anything in either of our actual vows. Carol cried through the whole ceremony and took full credit for it afterward at the reception, telling anyone who'd listen about the niece who never existed, the dinners that were never really about Paige, and the granddaughter who'd figured the whole thing out before any of the adults had the courage to. Nora rolled her eyes every time, but she never once corrected the story, because by then we both knew it was true. Every part of it. Sometimes people ask us how we got together, and Nora tells it a little differently every time depending on her mood. Sometimes it's the fake niece story, sometimes it's the story about the forklift and the loading bay, sometimes it's just, his truck almost ran a stop sign because of something my daughter said. But my favorite version is the one Ivy still tells, now 9 years old and no less blunt than she was at 7, which goes something like this. My grandma made up a fake cousin, my mom pretended not to notice, and I just kept smiling until they figured it out. Honestly, that might be the most accurate version of all. Have you ever had someone's family scheme their way into fixing your love life without asking? And have you ever caught a kid reading a room better than every adult standing in it? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.